Good afternoon. For many of you, it's good morning. For some of you, it is even good evening. It's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we get to hear about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators like hyperscale, co-location, edge, modular, and wholesale providers, as well as technology companies and facilities companies in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities, plus the construction, real estate, and investment companies that are a huge part of data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And of course, there's a vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem as well that powers data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And it doesn't matter what your role is on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you're in sales, marketing, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or maybe you are the executive leader, the maestro, the orchestra conductor that makes sure that everyone plays at the right time, at the right tempo, and at the right volume to make your team's growth goals a reality. If you're brand new to watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we would love to know if you have an idea for your biggest challenge that we should address on an upcoming show. If so, just be sure to include that in the comments wherever you're watching them. We'll get that in the consideration queue for an upcoming show. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming live educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox every Sunday by visiting www.dcsmi.com/newsletter or just dcsmi.com. And you'll see a big button right there at the top of the homepage. So what's on the agenda for this week? What are the big topics that I'm going to be talking about? We'll start by looking at how to generate leads for data center solutions and digital infrastructure. After that, we'll get into how to enter new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. Then we'll turn our attention to how to improve marketing for data center infrastructure, IT services, and network solutions. Then we'll take a quick break for a few words from our sponsor. After that, we'll look at how to sell IT asset disposition, ITAD, data security, and environmental responsibility. How a data center equipment financing company can find the right finance-specific target markets. And then as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, I'll talk about how to grow a data center software business with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics. So let's jump right in. Our first question is how to generate leads for data center solutions and digital infrastructure. So your company provides data center solutions and digital infrastructure, and you want some advice on lead generation. That's a great place to start. So the first question is, are your clients that buy data center solutions always also buying digital infrastructure from you, and vice versa? In other words, is it the same exact kind of client, or are they two potentially different kinds of clients that buy, where each buys a different one of your lines of business? In other words, do you have certain clients that buy your data center solutions and different kinds of clients that buy your digital infrastructure, or is it all one homogenous, one similar kind of client? If it's all one similar kind of client, we'll make things relatively simple for you. We first need to know where you've been most successful. And usually the place that we'll be able to sleuth that out is by looking at the logos on your website, by looking at the case studies on your website, by looking at your online reviews. And what we're looking for essentially is patterns. And in some cases, if we can't find enough of that in those places, on public-facing places, we can look in your CRM, your customer relationship management system. And again, what we're looking for is the commonalities among where you've been most successful. Where are your happiest clients? Where are your longest term clients? Where are your most profitable clients. Bear in mind, your happiest clients, your longest term clients, and your most profitable clients, maybe three different buckets of clients, but hopefully in a perfect world, your clients check off all of those boxes. In other words, they're happy to be with you, you're happy to be with them, and it's mutually beneficial, financially lucrative to continue working with them. So with all of that in mind, where do they tend to be geographically located? Can your company successfully sell your data center solutions and your digital infrastructure anywhere on the planet? Or do you primarily focus on a certain region, a certain state, a certain province, a certain country, a cluster of countries, a continent? Or can you truly sell globally? And it's possible with these two different lines of business that data center solutions are more premise based, meaning that there's physical servers and a physical facility that you need proximity to. And maybe digital infrastructure, you're able to sell long distance. In other words, your clients can be anywhere in the country, anywhere on the planet, and be buyers of your digital infrastructure. But if we're making some basic assumptions about your business model, that your typical clients are able to buy both your data center solutions and digital infrastructure, what geographic areas do they tend to be in? Second, how big or how small are these companies? And I'm not talking about how many racks they take up or how many cabinets or how many kilowatts or megawatts of capacity they potentially would need. I'm strictly talking about, from an employee headcount standpoint, how many employees that company has. And why are these geographic factors, why are these employee headcount factors so important? Because if you're going to normalize your lead generation, if you're going to build a scalable process for your team to be able to execute, at some point, you'll probably use a prospecting database like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or ZoomInfo, or something else like that. And most of those kinds of databases that you can use to prospect will have you narrow things down by geography and relative size, either by number of employees or amount of revenue. So what kind of client is big enough to meet your minimums? That would be your floor, your minimum company size you'd work with. And what size company is so overwhelmingly large that their requirements just wouldn't be a fit for your company's current capabilities? Maybe you max out at a company with an enterprise client that's got 1,000 employees. Maybe you max out and can't serve a client successfully with more than 10,000 employees. I don't know. Only you can answer these questions. But in terms of defining your ideal client profile, which is essential for your lead generation strategy, we have to know where these clients are located, where these future clients, these prospects are located, and how big or small they are. What's the minimum size and what's the maximum size? And the third area that's especially relevant for data center solutions and digital infrastructure is what industries, what vertical markets, what business models do these companies tend to have? This is a big deal because when it comes to digital infrastructure and a lot of solutions within the data center ecosystem, at the intersection of a certain location, certain geographic area, and certain business models, certain compliance requirements, certain certifications, accreditation requirements pop up that could either qualify or disqualify your company. You're probably familiar with a lot of requirements of like healthcare clients, financial services clients, government clients, education clients. So again, depending on where you're located and depending on the business model, the industries that your clients are located in, that may cause you to want to prioritize or completely deprioritize a certain kind of client in your ideal client profile, in your ICP. Once that's nailed down, you can take those parameters and build a target account list of the kind of clients you would love to have on your client list. In some cases, it might be as few as a few dozen clients. Usually it's a few hundred. In some cases, it may be thousands of clients. And then our goal is to figure out a way to attract and engage key people at those companies. How do we do that? Well, we need to know at these kinds of companies where you've been successful, who are the most important and second most important kind of stakeholders that you've had to build relationships with over time. The most important economic stakeholder that shows up on your decision committee will usually designate that person your primary buyer persona. The second most important person that shows up on your decision committee that's critical for this kind of sale, we'll call your secondary buyer persona. In some cases, there's a third category of stakeholder that we might call a tertiary buyer persona. Over time, you may get savvy enough about your sales process to recognize that there's also a negative buyer persona that might show up and be the kiss of death and the complete deal killer because they're completely against working with companies like yours, or for whatever reason they have a bug up there. You know what? And we just want to navigate around that person. That's a negative buyer persona. So we have a primary, a secondary, maybe a tertiary buyer persona. And a buyer persona, just to make sure we're on the same page, is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. It can't be all educated speculation. In other words, it's nice that Susie has worked in the data center industry for 12 years and Bob has worked in your company for 23 years. And sure, they have lots of great war stories and they know tons of people that fit these profiles. The problem is, though, is their experience and their recollection of the top of mind goals and the top of mind challenges for these buyer personas may only be somewhat accurate. So I would encourage you for sure to get this internal input, but maybe consider that internal input 20, 25% of the puzzle. The rest of your buyer persona research, 75, 80% of it, needs to come from talking with or studying actual people that are representative of that particular buyer persona. In a perfect world, interview them face to face. The second best would be interviewing them on a Zoom, on a video interview. If you don't have access to actual people you can interview, a reasonably good close approximation can be identifying people that fit that buyer persona and go get a stack of LinkedIn profiles and take the same names, job titles, and companies of those individual people, 10, 15, 20 people, and put them in a Google search or put them in a ChatGPT or Perplexity or what have you, and figure out the consensus on these 10, 15, 20 people on their biggest goals that they need to achieve professionally, both as individuals, as a team, and as a company. Ideally, those goals should intersect with something related to your data center solutions and digital infrastructure. And then in addition to their goals, what are the things that are driving them nuts? What are their biggest challenges? What are their biggest stressors? What are the things that are completely destroying their work-life balance and messing up their time away from the office, have taken away their ability to have peace and tranquility on vacations? Once you figure out the consensus on the biggest goals and the biggest challenges for each of these 2 or 3 categories of buyer personas, that will drive your content and your educational event strategy for that particular buyer persona. In other words, once we know what your most important kind of stakeholder cares the most about, because it's their job responsibilities and it's things that are driving them nuts, we need to set about showing up in a way where we can educate and build trust with that person on the issues, on the biggest goals and challenges that they care the most about, in their own words. And the in their own words is the phenomenally important reason why these needs to come from actual research and actual interviews, and not just from Bob and Susie who've been with your company and in this industry for decades. Because Bob and Susie may be reasonably correct, but there's a pretty good chance they're not going to get the language and the consensus perfect. And getting those words correct is the key to your headlines and your website copywriting and your product marketing and your sales enablement and your emails and your social posts, everything, your educational events, really, really resonating because it's their exact words. So the primary buyer persona, as you may surmise, is your biggest priority. Your second biggest priority is running this strategy, running this playbook for lead generation for the second most important kind of stakeholder, the secondary buyer persona. And when we're talking about lead generation, once we've figured out what they care most about, then we need to make sure that our digital presence, our digital doorstep, our website, our content, our ebooks, our special reports, our webinars, our educational, our offline webinars, our educational events, our breakfast seminars, our lunch and learns, everything about generating leads should be about figuring out a way for our client-facing team to show up not as a vendor, but as an educator, as a teacher, as a consultant, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted advisor, perhaps even as a thought leader. Because in a self-guided buyer's journey, which is the predominant buyer's journey today, most of your best prospects and clients for data center solutions and digital infrastructure do not want to spend much time with your sales team anymore. 10 years ago, they might have spent about half of their buyer's journey, half of your sales cycle with your sales team. Those days are long gone. And 2010s, it was very common to find 56% of the journey was over before you got to meet prospects. In other words, you still had 44% of the journey to work with, to educate and build trust, build rapport with, and advance a sales process. Those days are long gone. 10 years of digital transformation, baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, and millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. So we're now in this place where, as Gartner so succinctly puts it, 83% of a buyer's journey is over before vendor contact, before sales team contact. That means best case scenario, you're only in there 17% of the time now. And that is a big problem, because if you don't get to spend very much time with your prospects anymore until they've just about made up their mind, there's a really good chance that by the time you meet with them, it's like talking to a wall. They've already made up their mind, and it's not in favor of what you would have recommended. So how do we get back in there early and often in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, so we have a chance with our subject matter experts, our trusted advisors, our thought leaders that are on our own client-facing team, our own employees, so they have a chance to educate and build trust with your most important prospects and clients. Again, that is the $1 million, euro, pound, whatever your currency equivalent question is how do we reposition? How do we give a radical makeover to our existing client-facing team members so they're now very comfortable showing up in an educational subject matter expertise context with your prospects and clients? Because everything that you do going forward with lead generation and being in on as many of those 28 touch points as possible is going to come down to how good of a job you can do at educating and building trust with the biggest goals and challenges that are top of mind for your most important buyer personas. And the more value that we can provide, the less need there is for your prospects and clients to spend time with your competitors, your direct competitors, your indirect competitors, your non-business model competitors, because the more time you spend indoctrinating your most important future clients, your most important prospects, your most important leads with your way of looking at the world, the more likely it is that you're framing the purchase criteria in a way that heavily stacks the decks in your favor. And when you do this really well, you're nearly guaranteed to stay on the short list. When you do this exceptionally well, your prospects will be spending so much time with members of your team that there's really no time or interest in them spending much time with your competitors anymore. So by nature of that fact alone, by the time you get to the end of the awareness and consideration stages and they're finally ready for sales contact, you may discover that many or most of your competitors have been dropped from the shortlist, have been dropped from consideration, and you're the last company standing, or one of the last company standings, because you've used these educational experiences to help show exactly this particular person in this kind of company what step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You basically have become their pocket MBA, their pocket university, academy, college, whatever you want to call it, for bringing them up to speed on what's most important for them to be thinking about as they navigate the full journey. And the key thing is you got in there early and you're getting in there often. If you overinvest in massive conferences and field marketing, you'll own 1 or 2 of those 28 touch points. The problem is, person gets back from the big conference and there's going to be 25 or 26 other touch points that are going to happen between your initial time with them and when they actually purchase. So the question is, how good of a job are you doing at showing up consistently and adding value that educates and builds trust, so they spend most of those remaining 25 or 26 touch points with you? If you're like most companies, your sales team, your account executives will do some vigorous follow-up and they'll attempt to have a couple touch points. But what you may not be realize that's going on right under your nose is those same prospects and clients are learning. Who are they learning from? More than likely, they're learning from your competitors, your direct, your indirect competitors, your non-business model competitors. So it is in your exceptionally strong vested interest to make sure that you're able to show up early and often in an educational context. So that's the big unlock for generating leads for data center solutions and digital infrastructure in today's modern buyer's journeys. Next question up that I'm going to be addressing this week is, how do we enter new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. How to enter new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. Wow, that's a complicated question. And it usually, that question for sure has a go-to-market and a sales and a marketing component to it. But the reality is what usually dominates the process this early on is understanding that there's a big difference between data center development and data center business development. Data center development is usually the domain of investors who have the capital required to deploy to make new data center developments a reality, and construction and real estate. Typically, technology and facilities comes a little bit later on when you start talking about commissioning, and sales and marketing is ideally being done around the same time that you're thinking about, or a little earlier on than commissioning, to try to pre-lease and fill up the particular those particular data centers and sell out the digital infrastructure that's going to be delivered through those facilities. But yeah, early on, when it comes to entering new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure, that's usually less of a go-to-market issue, less of a sales and marketing playbook issue very early on, and more a matter of investors, private equity, venture capital. There's a whole separate complex ecosystem now of digital infrastructure investors, and that would be a really, really great place to start. And they network with and have relationships with general contractors, construction companies, architects, site selection experts, design build specialists, real estate investment trusts, all of the stuff that wraps the construction and the capital projects. A lot of what's happening now in large projects as well for finding the right markets for building data centers is many of the most popular data center markets in the US and around the globe are now very much power constrained. There just isn't enough utility grid power to go around anymore. So it's becoming very complicated to find space, to find land to build these big projects where you can get government regulators and utility companies and community activists to all be totally, completely fine with greenlighting a major data center development project. And one of the more interesting challenges going forward for established data center developers and real estate investment trusts that build these big projects is, in reality, your go-to-market playbook, your educational content, your educational events can't just focus on doing these surface level community building kind of efforts to hope to win people over. Sponsoring a little league team, holding a community fair, community health fair, sponsoring a 10K race or something like that. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just that in a lot of markets, the stakes for getting the approval to move ahead with these massive projects have become so complex that that's like, those were all good to do 5 or 10 years ago, and they're not bad to continue doing. It's just that because of the complex relationships that elected officials have with data center developers and the investors who fund these projects, and the complicated relationships that utility power companies have, again, with the data center developers and the builders of these projects and the investors of these projects, as well as the community activists that are fed up with you taking all of their water and their utility power and driving up their prices, it's gotten a lot more complicated to navigate how this works. So for developers that are well capitalized, that have been doing this a long time, some of them are actually starting to publish content and host events that are specific to what would normally not have been considered prioritized buyer personas in the past. But the reality is, if you think about a very high value account-based marketing campaign, like if you were selling 8-figure hyperscale deals, these are 8 and 9-figure data center development projects. So if you need to put 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 into educational resources just at elected officials in that area, just at utility companies in that area, just at community activists in that particular area, like this is just now a cost of doing business. So the question was, how do we enter new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure? It's make sure that you have the right talent on the team. Building a data center is so much more complicated today than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. The amount of capital required to do it has gone up exponentially. Figuring out if you need to have alternative plans around power. I mean, there's been people talking about these small modular nuclear reactors for a while. They haven't really gotten much traction. In Europe, we're seeing a lot more conversations around heat reuse, where these data centers are built with the idea that they vent out enormous amounts of heat. And if there are apartment buildings or office buildings or retail space or something like that in immediate proximity to the data centers, well, they can provide free heating for several months a year, which can not only save the communities a lot of money, but can be great for hitting your sustainability metrics and taking a lot of carbon, going from being carbon neutral to being what's known as carbon negative. Actually, every time someone asks me to explain the difference between carbon neutral and carbon negative, I usually defer to one of the really smart people in that area that's been on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. But in general, carbon neutral doesn't add to it. Carbon negative takes the bad stuff out. So, and again, there's a lot of different ways that this is being approached depending on where you're located. It seems that heat reuse and sustainability is getting a lot more attention in Europe than in other parts of the world. So again, these building data centers and creating digital infrastructure, for sure, while there are companies that are doing a great job in multiple regions around the world, there for sure is different expertise that's required to be in these businesses successfully, from more of the domain of DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. A very practical consideration that comes up at the time when you start to create go-to-market and sales and marketing resources is, depending on how many different locations you're in, it's very possible that you're going to need different content creation and different marketing and sales talent that is multilingual, or at least bilingual, depending on the language requirements in that particular area. So you can't count on the fact that just English language marketing and sales campaigns and go-to-market campaigns is going to get it done. And that reason alone, when you're raising capital and when you're looking at site selection and you're going to design and build and all that stuff, it's very possible you're going to need multilingual talent at that stage as well. But again, that goes back to the expertise of doing business in those local areas. So those are all the considerations to think about when it comes to entering new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. There's some great SaaS analytics companies. There's some great research companies that keep track of this for sure. You can go into Sales Navigator and run some searches on, hey, if we've done really well in manufacturing companies of a certain employee range and with a certain kind of IT directors, for sure, you can run some prospecting lists against that. You can look at tools like Data Center Hawk. You can look at DC Byte. There's a lot of great solutions. Structure Research does a lot of stuff in this area. There's a lot of great companies in the ecosystem that can help you get up to speed on the capital side and the real estate side and availability and everything to understand what's going on from a competitive standpoint. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's getting way more complicated than it was in the past to enter new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. Make sure you build your team with the right people in the right roles to be able to tackle this from end to end. It's usually a much, much bigger conversation than just go-to-market strategy and sales and marketing. Because we do a lot of content marketing, because we do a lot of our own thought leadership, we do get a fair amount of leads from people that come to us that think they're ready to talk about personas and ideal client profiles. And in reality, they actually need to be talking to investors and CFOs, fractional CFOs, to put their materials together on how they're going to present, and need to be doing market research on costs and expenses and pipelines and timelines and everything in that area, on the capital, on the investment side, on the development side, on the construction side, long before they start thinking about what kind of clients they're going to need to market and sell to fill up that space for their newly built data center facilities and creating digital infrastructure, and even just figuring out the business model. Do they want to be in the co-location business? They want to be in the hyperscale business, wholesale business, edge, modular. There's a lot of different considerations around business model that usually come up around the same time. So that's what I would be thinking about when it comes to entering new markets for building data centers and creating digital infrastructure. Next question up is, by the way, if you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word to other people. So next question is, how do we improve marketing for data center infrastructure, IT services, and network solutions? So your company is in the business of marketing and selling and servicing data center infrastructure, IT services, and network solutions. So the first thing is, do all of your clients buy all of these services, or are there different clients that are buying different services? In other words, like an IT services company might also be known as a managed IT services company or managed service provider, an MSP. And a managed service provider could potentially be providing 100% of their managed services, their IT services, in data centers, but they also may be only providing 20% of their services in data center facilities and 80% of their managed services remotely and in traditional office environments or warehouse environments, industrial environments, retail environments. So yeah, we need to get a little bit more clarity on your business model. That said, there's also a lot more data center operators that provide outsourced services, that provide outsourced remote hands and managed services like that than as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And that is a great opportunity to simplify things for your clients. It's also a great incremental revenue source with really good unit economics because you're typically selling this to these same clients. But it also can be a little bit of a challenge if you have a channel partner program to make sure that there's a clear line in the sand about what you do versus what they do, because managed service providers tend to be a very cautious, skeptical bunch. And if you're not really clear about potential who owns accounts and account encroachment and what you do versus they do, it can cause some problems, some channel conflict later on, both among existing channel partners and with you and the channel partners that you're trying so hard to win over as a loyal extension of your sales and services team. So yeah, your managed services, you're providing them to all of the clients that also provide digital data center infrastructure and network solutions, or you're providing those separately? Also, are there companies that you would sell data center infrastructure to, but not necessarily network solutions? When I think of network solutions in this context, it sounds a lot like telecommunications, where interconnects, cross connects, meet me rooms, carrier neutral, peering, all that stuff. So like, are these 3 separate lines of business that we can offer to the same client base? If so, then it simplifies things quite a bit. And then we need to know, before we do your marketing playbook, we need to know who's the ideal client and where are they located, how big or how small are they, and are there certain industries where you tend to do better than others? Where they're located comes into play big time for data center operators, because it's very possible that you may need a separate marketing playbook for hyperlocal and long distance or virtual. The hyperlocal marketing playbook will lean heavily on, of course, understanding your buyer personas and what their biggest goals and challenges are and how you can educate and build trust with those buyer personas. But for hyperlocal, the name of the game is to get those prospects and future clients to come visit you. They could come visit for tours. They could come visit for community networking events. They could come visit for educational events, breakfast seminars, lunch and learns. But in most cases, the hyperlocal playbook for a data center operator is getting your ideal clients to visit your location on a regular basis and have a great experience as they get to interact and meet with members of your client-facing team. The long distance version of that looks to take the same thing that you know about those specific buyer personas, and instead of being able to invite them to a lunch and learn event or a breakfast seminar or a business after hours networking kind of event that you're hosting in your foyer, you need to be able to educate and build trust long distance. So going live streams, LinkedIn events, webinars, virtual events, virtual tours, podcasts, educational videos, being able to do virtual tours, all of those are phenomenally powerful and phenomenally important for being able to sell your data center infrastructure, your IT services, and network solutions potentially long distance to people that are not within a 30 or 60-minute drive of one of your facilities. So let's get really clear at the company level where you win best. Usually your case studies, your logos, your testimonials will give us some big clues of that ideal client profile. From there, you can build out a target account list. From there, you can figure out who the most important stakeholders are in those accounts, your buyer personas, what are the biggest goals and challenges of those buyer personas. And that insight should drive most of your marketing. How do we get in early and often? How do we, in a self-guided buyer's journey, where most of your prospects don't want to spend much time with your sales team anymore, how do we show up in an educational context? So instead of your prospects and clients feeling like they're spending time with a vendor, they're spending time with a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, or even your thought leaders. And these typically should be coming from your own internal team. This changes the nature of how you hire and do professional development and cross-training and upskilling. And sure, there's different levels of expertise among your team. So you can have different levels of people involved in these educational resources, these educational events. But at the end of the day, there's like typically 28 touch points between complete stranger and a purchase decision when it comes to things like data center infrastructure, IT services, and network solutions. Our goal is to be in on as many of those 28 touch points as possible, not as a vendor, not being shoved in the vendor box and being treated like crap, but being welcomed in, because your prospects and clients are getting so much value from spending time with members of your team, your AEs, your account executives, your sales development reps, your marketers, your account managers, your product managers, your channel partner manager. They really, really enjoy spending time with members of your team because they're learning so much from them that's helping them with their careers, that's helping them figure out how they're going to achieve their individual goals, their team goals, their company's goals, and figuring out how they're going to address their biggest challenges that are driving them nuts right now. And the better job you can do with remaking over, with pivoting, with showing up now more like a big four consultant and less like a vendor, the better off it's going to be for all of your marketing when it comes to data center infrastructure, IT services, network, and network solutions. With that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with 3 more questions for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our live Q&A show, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Go-to-Market Q&A show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. So what is up next? What among these 6 challenges, 6 biggest questions are we going to talk about next this week? Well, we're going to move into the domain of IT asset disposition, ITAD. And how do we sell IT asset disposition with data security and environmental responsibility? Yeah, those are great. That's a great question to talk about next, because IT asset disposition is actually I don't want to say it's a crowded space, but there's definitely a lot more companies that provide these services now than seemingly a few years ago. And there's a lot of business models that are somewhat related to this. Companies that do decommissioning, companies that do moving sometimes get involved in that, or at least do referrals back and forth, because it seems to be a similar kind of life cycle to, hey, we're getting rid of a big fleet of servers and telecommunications equipment because we're moving to a new location, or we're decommissioning a data center or something like that. But when it comes to asset management, when it comes to asset disposition, for sure, a lot of questions come up around data security and environmental responsibility. And those kinds of questions really give you a great opportunity to step forward out of the vendor box and into the educator box and into the role of an educator. So if we look at the general trends that are going on among buyers of data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities, 10 years ago, they used to spend like half of their buyer's journey, half of your sales process, with a member of your sales team. At the time in the mid 2010s, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, did some research with Sirius Decisions and Salesforce and concluded that an estimated 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before vendor contact. So you still got to spend almost half of the research and decision-making process with your best prospects and clients. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, those days are long gone. Over the past 10 years, a lot of baby boomers have retired, and people in leadership roles tend to be from Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. And especially as Gen Z and millennials have moved into decision-making roles, they're preferring a more digital-driven, self-guided buyer's journey. In addition to digital transformation, in addition to these generational changes, add into the total environment of understanding what's going on here, that millions of people were working from home for the first couple of years in the early 2020s. And we now live in this world where Gartner estimates, and we concur largely by what we see at DCSMI, that 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before sales contact, before vendor contact. In other words, the game is 83% over before you ever get let into the stadium. That means, best case scenario, you're only getting to spend the final 17% of the research and decision-making process with someone that's potentially looking to buy IT asset disposition. So if they have questions, if your prospects and clients have questions about data security and environmental responsibility, we can't depend on just showing up as a vendor anymore. We need to get out of the vendor box, and we need to show up as an educator. And the way we do that is we take members of your client-facing team and we give them a makeover so that they're able to engage with your prospects and clients more as consultants, more as teachers, more as subject matter experts, more as trusted advisors. Because in order for you to have a presence and surface area in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, especially in the early and middle stages of the buyer's journey, we need to rethink the context in which we interact with our prospects and clients. We can't be spending most of our time begging for attention anymore and bugging and nagging people desperate to try to get meetings with them. Instead, we need to provide so much value that our prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your sales team because they're learning so much from them. For a couple of years now, I've been talking about the future of enterprise sales comes down to rethinking your enterprise salespeople so they have the vibe, so they come across more like Big Four consultants, like you feel like you're engaging with a $500 or $1,000 an hour consultant that works for like PwC, EY, KPMG, or Deloitte or something like that. That's the vibe you're looking for. Does that mean you need to do a find and replace on job titles on your business cards and your email signature and your LinkedIn profile? Yeah, that's certainly part of it. But for most companies, this is a really big culture change. And that needs to usually start all the way up at the CEO level for small and mid-sized companies. And for enterprise companies, you still need like a C-level sponsor. It's just that it's probably a chief commercial officer, a chief revenue officer, or chief marketing officer. But it's someone at a high executive sponsor level that says, going forward, we are tired of being marginalized. We're tired of having to compete on price. We're tired of being an afterthought for the clients that we want to have. We know we're better than the competition, but we can't be the best kept secret anymore. And in order to get out of being the best kept secret, we need the world to understand. We need the digital infrastructure ecosystem to understand that we are the best experts on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with IT asset disposition, data security, and environmental responsibility. And we're going to make a huge investment going forward to let the world know that we are the go-to source when it comes to anything and everything having to do with ITAD, data security, and environmental responsibility. And we're going to start by doing that by getting really crisp about who the ideal client is. We're getting really crisp about who the buyer personas are. And we're going to show up early and often as much as needed in as many of those 28 touch points as possible to be fantastic educators, and all of that's going to lead to very, very high levels of trust because we're going to teach about all of the issues that are relevant to data security and environmental responsibility at the intersection of asset disposition and at the intersection of specific client business models, specific client locations, specific to client sizes, and specific to these job functions in these companies, these primary and secondary buyer personas, these stakeholders who are on this decision committee. And the better job you can do with transforming your sales team to look a lot more like consultants, the easier it's going to be for them to get invited in early and often. And when your sales team, your ITAD sales team, does a phenomenal job with this, they'll nearly guarantee that they stay on the shortlist throughout the full buyer's journey. When they do this at a world-class level, you'll find that your prospects and clients are spending so much time with members of your client-facing team that your prospects and clients have no time or desire to spend time with others. In other words, your competitors start to get elbowed out because you're starting to do a phenomenal job with educating and building trust about data security and environmental responsibility when it comes to asset disposition. So by the time your ideal clients, your prospects are ready for a sales conversation, you're nearly guaranteed to be on the short list, and most of the competitive options will have already dropped off the short list, which is a beautiful thing. So if you want to be able to sell IT asset disposition with data security and environmental responsibility, it's a culture shift. It's a prioritization, and it's a recognition that going forward, we're not going to just be seen as an asset disposition vendor anymore. We want to be seen as the best choice on the planet for companies that are located in this particular geographic region, of this size, in these certain kinds of industries. And we're going to do a phenomenal job of educating and building trust with the most important and second most important kind of stakeholders that show up on these decision committees. That's how to more successfully sell IT asset disposition with data security and environmental responsibility to the modern buyer. Not the buyer with how they used to buy 10 or 20 years ago, but how they're actually researching, comparing options, and making their purchase decisions today. Next question up is, so this is a financing company, equipment financing company. How does a data center equipment financing company find the right finance-specific target market? So how does a company that is primarily in the business of providing equipment financing for data centers find the right finance-specific target market? So there's two real scenarios here. The first scenario is this is a brand new equipment financing company that doesn't have an existing client list. There's no case studies on the website. There's no logos. There's no success sitting in your customer relationship management system, your CRM system that you're just looking to pattern. And you're completely doing this with no pattern recognition. You haven't hit product market fit. The reason that that's relatively far-fetched is most of the time when someone is getting into the equipment financing business, they've successfully worked for another company that did data center equipment financing, and or they're hiring other talent that's worked for these companies that have successfully done data center equipment financing. So they have an idea as to where they think they're going to win, how they're going to get to product market fit, even as a startup. So they already understand geographically where they can do business. And for sure, the equipment financing business is going to be defined usually by national boundaries, right? Because there's regulation in so many different nations on what you're allowed to and not allowed to do when it comes to debt, right? When it comes to equipment financing. So that alone is going to have ramifications for how you define your ideal client profile, and identifying specific target markets is where you have expertise and where you're licensed by regulators to be able to legally do business. And again, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on primetime TV or on live events. But in general, yeah, for sure, you need a trusted finance advisor. You need a trusted legal advisor as part of your team to be in this business in the first place. But finding the right specific target market, yeah, there's geographic parts to it. There's size parts to it. Like what kind of data center related business, especially like a data center operator, how big do they need to be worth your while? And if they get to a certain size, are they so large that they would overwhelm your both available capital that you have, as well as your talent's ability to effectively service that? So you may come to the conclusion, for example, that it's data center operators in a certain geographic region that have, say, 50 to 500 employees or 50 to 1,000 employees or something like that. So you're getting closer to having an ideal client profile on defining the right target market. And again, your business model realities, your size, the amount of capital, regulatory issues will all come into play on defining the right specific kind of finance target market. Now, the flip side is you already have an established business, you already have a book of business, and you know who your best clients are, and you're just looking for more just like that. So if that's the case, if you want more clients that need equipment financing, then we define the ideal clients, where they're located, their size, certain industries or business models that are better than others. And then we're trying to figure out who the ideal person is at those companies that you want to be educating and building trust with, that you need to create awareness and educate and stay with throughout their full journey. And a lot of cases, it could be a CFO. In much bigger companies, it could be someone that reports to a CFO. In much smaller companies, it could be the CEO or the president or the owner that works with an outsourced or a fractional CFO, or there could be a chief investment officer. The investment officers are usually getting involved in real estate related projects. When you're talking about more tactical projects with equipment, it's probably a combination of a finance person and an IT infrastructure kind of person, or an asset management kind of person on the IT side. Again, these roles are going to depend a lot on the company size. Generally, smaller companies, you have one person that's wearing lots of different hats. In larger companies, much bigger teams, possibly even geographically dispersed as opposed to centralized. And again, this is all the muscle memory of figuring out where you've done best in the past, your ideal client, who's had the smoothest onboarding, the smoothest closing, the smoothest underwriting, who's been the happiest, who's helped spread your word, who's brought repeat business. All of those are going to roll into who you want more of. So yeah, when it comes to finding the right finance specific target markets, two scenarios. One is you're brand new and you're leaning heavily on the career experience of those that you've hired onto your team, from learning this through working with other equipment financing companies at different stages of their career, or you have an existing book of business and you're looking to clone that. But either way, at the end of the day, it's the same basic go-to-market exercises you'd use for dozens of different kinds of business models in the data center ecosystem. We need to know the company, the ideal client profile that we're looking for, and then we need to know the stakeholders internally that matter most, that we need to capture the attention of and educate and build trust with and stay with throughout their full buyer's journey. You know, the IT executive and the finance executive, when they're dealing with equipment financing, they have the same purchase preferences for you that they would for anything. Like a CFO that's buying SaaS doesn't want to talk to a SaaS salesperson until they're near the end of the journey. An IT person that's buying servers doesn't want to talk to a salesperson until they're near the end of the journey. So with your equipment financing, we also need to figure out a way to show up more as a teacher, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as a subject matter expert. So your most important buyer personas are motivated to want to spend time with members of your client-facing team. So you're not chasing them and begging for attention all the time. They actually want to spend time with members of your team. So that's how I would approach the go-to-market, the marketing, the sales strategy, and finding the right finance-specific target market for your data center equipment financing company. And with that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've gotten good value from this week's show, this week's episode, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational resources and events just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. So our final question is, how do we grow a data center software business with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics? How do we grow a data center software business with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics? Well, it's interesting the way this question is worded. It sounds like this is a fairly early stage software business, because typically a discussion around healthy unit economics would usually be directed at finance expertise for a much larger, much more sophisticated kind of buyer, as opposed to directed more at a go-to-market sales and marketing kind of strategy. But in terms of competitive pricing and healthy unit economics, this sounds like your company hasn't quite gotten to product market fit or go-to-market fit. So product market fit is the degree to which you know exactly who your ideal clients are. You know the software that they're purchasing from you. You know the price points that they're willing to pay, and you know how often they buy or the duration of their SaaS agreement or how long they stick. So you understand your unit economics around your traditional software SaaS. So you're probably very comfortable with like understanding the monthly recurring revenue, the annual recurring revenue, the CAC, the client acquisition cost, or what's sometimes called the cost of client acquisition, payback period, sales cycle length, margins, commissions that you can afford to pay for both direct and indirect sales. All of that stuff you probably have a really strong handle on if you are somewhere between product market fit and go-to-market fit. Go-to-market fit means you've gotten way beyond founder-led sales. You've successfully hired and onboarded and retained a sales team for an extended period of time, at least 6, 12, 18 months through a few different sales cycles. And you've proven that others besides the founders are able to sell this software to data centers. So with that in mind, regardless of whether you have a dedicated product manager or a chief product officer or a founder who has worn the hat for a while of being your chief product officer or your product person, you more than likely have figured out the pricing that you need to deliver value at the stage that your company is at to be competitive with others in the marketplace, and how you're positioning your company. You figured out the healthy unit economics. More than likely, if you have clarity on that, you hopefully have a good internal finance person, a VP of finance, or a fractional version or a fractional CFO or something like that. So yeah, when it comes to growing a software business and competitive pricing and healthy unit economics, it is possible for a very, very resourceful founder to figure all of this out. But at some point, you'll need dedicated product expertise, you'll need dedicated finance expertise before you even get into what the go-to-market strategy, what the marketing and sales strategy, what the customer success or account management strategy should be to be able to grow this. You'll also at some point need to make a decision as to whether all of your growth is going to come from having a direct sales force, meaning hiring your own account executives, your own AEs, your own sales development reps, your own SDRs, or are you planning on having both direct and indirect? And indirect would be a channel partner type of program where you're perhaps working with data center consultants or integrators or brokers or some other kind of, or managed service providers, some other kind of entity that would be in a position to potentially sell and service, install, configure, and train on your software. So there's a couple different pieces there that need to come into play, is getting a really strong handle on product market fit to understand the competitive positioning and how you position your company relative to the other options that are available to people in the marketplace. And for that, reminds me of the Job to Be Done framework, JTBD, that was popularized in the Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen out of Harvard Business School, and the VC world like Andreessen Horowitz, Mark Andreessen of Netscape fame, and Lean Startup, the Eric Ries, Steve Blank kind of ecosystem, thinking about like how you position your startup, increasing your cycles, your cycle frequency, your iterations, so you can get tighter on improving your software product and really, really understanding where you fit in the marketplace, the job you actually do, so you can narrow the field and decide who you actually are deliberately deciding to compete with. Because when it comes to a software business, you likely have direct competitors. Those are the obvious ones that come up at the tail end of your sales process that your sales team, that your product person, your leadership team are acutely aware of. Then there's the indirect competitors. The indirect competitors don't show up quite as often, usually because they're a lot bigger or a lot smaller than your company, or they don't usually operate in your geographic region, but they sometimes do. So they're indirect usually because of a big disparity between your company and the size of that company and their proximity, their proximity to prospects, proximity to facilities, proximity to decision makers in the case of a data center related business. Then there's non-business model competition. This is the one that nobody thinks about. And it's a really big deal in a self-guided buyer's journey to take into account these non-business model competitors. Non-business model competitors are essentially companies, organizations, media companies, conferences, channel programs that create great educational content, great educational events on topics that are top of mind for your most important buyers, but they're not in the software business. They don't compete head to head with you, but you're all competing for scarce attention among your ideal clients. So they can be a formidable competitive force to deal with when you're trying to get your great downloadable premium content, your explainer videos, your podcasts, your breakfast seminars, your road tour, your lunch and learns, whatever it is that you're using to try to create visibility. They might be getting in the way. So we need to be aware of all of these competitive forces. And because of that, we need to be super crisp about who our ideal clients are and who the most important buyer personas are that we're trying to get in front of. In the case of a software business, usually the persona is targeting a IT infrastructure manager or a data center operations person, the network operations center. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's usually, then there's a whole separate category of software that focuses more on the facility side, like the building itself, as opposed to the IT assets, the IT infrastructure that's inside. So dial that in a little more carefully. But before you are focused on growth and doing this with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics, we need to make sure that the whole business model makes sense. In other words, before you start taking on a lot of investor capital, before you start taking on lines of credit, before you start taking on debt, it's really, really important to make sure that you've thought through whether these unit economics are actually healthy. Is your lifetime value significantly more than your cost of acquisition? Are there adjacent modules? Are there adjacent expansion revenue opportunities that are in your line of sight that could change things down the road? But your growth strategy, you're absolutely right, it needs to take into account competitive market realities, your current product capabilities, your roadmap of where you're making investments for upgrades in your product over the next 6, 12, 18 months, and who the ideal clients are that can get the most value from your platform, that can get the most value from your software, that have the smoothest onboarding experience and the best relationship with your CSMs, your customer success managers, your account managers, your AMs, because they have great onboarding. They get to initial value, they get to intended value, and they get to extended value with incredible amounts of speed, velocity, frequency, and they become great promoters of your software that are singing your praises from the rooftop, writing phenomenal reviews, and helping to fuel positive digital word of mouth. That's so incredibly important in the self-guided buyer's journey, where most of your prospects and clients are not going to spend much time with your sales team anymore. So we need to figure out a way for us to improve your brand in a world where your brand is now defined by everything that the marketplace says about your company when you're not in the room. It's way beyond, branding as today is way beyond just the domain of a creative director. It's way beyond just your hexadecimal colors and your fonts and your logo. Your brand is everything that the ecosystem, that the industry says about your software when you're not in the room. So we need to do a really, really good job of making sure that our educational experiences, that our educational content, that our reputation management is providing awesome value to our intended buyer personas for our particular software for the data center industry. So those are some of the main considerations that I would think about with growing a data center business with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics. I would also think a lot about one-to-many, whether it's one-to-many because you're doing a lot of webinars, because you're doing group demo webinars, because you're doing phenomenal onboarding webinars and customer education, customer training. And I would also make sure that you have lots of resources for people that want to self-propel themselves through your journey, so they can find on-demand versions of all of those assets as well. So when they visit your website at 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon on a holiday weekend, and there's no AEs and there's no SDRs and there's no CSMs that are going to be around for literally 48 or 72 hours, that you give your ideal buyer a chance to learn on their own, continually suggesting the next logical steps proactively, because you know what the pattern recognition is for that kind of buyer. So you can come in on Tuesday morning and be blown away that someone has a demo request on one of your account executives' calendars for Tuesday afternoon, and they go look at the contact record and they see that their jaw's dropping. This person has consumed 71 different pages of content on your website. They've submitted 17 different forms for ebooks and watching on-demand webinars. They've consumed 3.5 hours of video content. And you're like, this person's going to come to this meeting way educated about what it is that we do. So hopefully well indoctrinated about our way of looking at things And we largely are probably 80% there to winning the deal by the time that first meeting happens. Would that have happened if we didn't have these great educational resources on our website? Heck no. What would have ended up happening is that person would have spent time on someone else's website on that holiday weekend, learning about how your competitor's software can help them improve their data center related business. So we got to get much closer to our buyers to understand what their biggest goals and challenges are. We need to respect the way that they now research and make their purchase decisions. And we need to show up early and often to support their digital buyer's journey. So by the time they get to the decision stage, we've already heavily won them over. And then your real goal as the enterprise software sales professional is to act more like a project manager that helps your internal champion to drive alignment across the different silos, the different teams in the company, than necessarily get buy-in to make this particular deal happen. It's not about selling anymore. It's more guiding them in their purchase process. And the more your sales professionals, the more your AEs are trained to be able to deliver value at that level, the better everything is going to be with growing your data center software business with competitive pricing and healthy unit economics. So that is the final question that I'm going to be able to answer in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've gotten good value from this episode, make sure to hit the like button. If you have an idea for an upcoming question or upcoming challenge that I should consider addressing in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments. Until next time, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connection request and mention that you watched the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A episode. And I look forward to seeing you back again next week. Have a great week, and I wish you much success in growing your data center related business. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.